with the economy, the war, this constant crushing uncertainty of these days of 2026, it's easy to feel like we're on a ship that's heading for a waterfall without any control. And yet these questions keep coming for us as individuals. Why am I still unfulfilled? Why is there so much suffering? Where is my place in all of this? Why is everything so screwed up?
So if you are tired of the everyday struggle and you're looking for a greater understanding of what's really going on, looking for a greater level of truth in your life, you're in the right place. We aren't here to dissect the news or talk about current events in any way. We're here to help you bridge the gap between the chaos that is out there and the stability that lies inside of you.
Welcome to Becoming You, the Path to Consciousness, where we apply spiritual wisdom and truth to your everyday life. I'm Terry Hasty.
And I'm Haydn Hasty. And our mission is really pretty simple. We're here to talk about the goals and the aims, and most importantly, the methods of individual transformation through spiritual realization.
We all have questions about our lives, about our pain, our purpose, our path.
So that's what we are here for, to help you build a bridge from all of that agitation and chaos of the outer world to the depths of your inner being, where you will find all the answers that you're looking for. So welcome to the journey. We're on the same journey as you are. I wish the times were different. I wish we could sit around and talk and tell stories and talk about current events, and in the
Boy, we could
process,
waste a lot of time doing that, couldn't we? I mean, I do sometimes, I have to admit.
and so do I, but I just can't do that in this work. I'm not even interested in my own opinion of things. Why would anybody else be? I just think that it's become an essential task, whether we like it or not, to come to a greater and nobler understanding of our existence that goes beyond just surviving or just trying to figure out how to live a comfortable life, because that is not why we're here.
And yet, it's not saying we shouldn't be able to have a nice life, a comfortable life, but there's so much more going on than that. And all of these events today are pushing us to that realization.
You can have it all. We are being forced in today's times, we're being forced to evolve. And the more conscious you become about how that works, the more grace you will experience in that process, including the difficulties that you have to face. But by learning to align yourself with these greater truths, with what I refer to, I just call it a spiritual principle or spiritual realization, you really embark, even if you're not aware of it, you embark on a path of awakening and fulfillment, which is what these times are about. The quest for, as anybody is aware, the quest for personal mastery over the forces that are creating your life is innate in every single human being. Every single day we wake up, we're trying to figure out how to become truly happy and fulfilled. It's an ongoing process, and each understanding, no matter how small it is, contributes to that greater unfolding of your life and your being. So as you continue to nurture this inner journey, your outer life begins to conform with these realizations. That's really how it works. The mind begins to conform to those understandings. And this is the true understanding of how transformation occurs.
I think it's kind of scary, Hayden. I know some years ago, maybe even decades, I was hesitant to transform because I didn't want to give up the life that I wanted or I thought I wanted. I didn't want to stand out from the crowd. I didn't want to not be able to laugh at things that other people were laughing at. And I think that this whole idea of transformation, while it's been discussed for a very long time, and now that the world seems crazier than ever and the issue of destruction is so real as it's ever been, at least in my, short life in the big picture of things as I'm 64 years in, but there's so much suffering taking place and so much corruption and so much pain that it's almost like we can't just put our head in the sand anymore and pretend that it's all business as usual. We have to understand that we are making progress and we're part of that progress. It's like all water flows to the ocean. It knows where it's going. Everything is flowing toward the good. It's like we're navigating our way from the river to the ocean, but we're not as sure of our destination as the river is.
Well, it's what you just said. Yes, progress, as long as you're willing to include all aspects of progress, which is creation and destruction. And the destructive part of that process is what we're going through now. But its goal, without question, is progress and transformation.
Most people I talk to now, and I think we've even said it, is they say, I just want to live long enough to get through the destruction and get to the creative. I just
Well,
want
me
to see
too. Who doesn't?
what's this expansion that's got to come. It's really a law of physics. It's a law of history. It's a law of evolution that destruction is always followed by creation.
It is its intended destination, and each day, each moment, each second is always moving toward that. So, we're going to begin a three-part series. This is the first of three that is focused on the goals, and in particular, as time goes by, and all the way through the three podcasts, the methods by which each one of us can actively engage in what is happening in the world today, not by focusing on the outer world and all of the problems there, but on the inner world. And as we've said before, the outer is a mirror image of the inner.
It's like a conversation we had yesterday, and a friend of ours said, I'm just saturated with, she didn't say the outer, she said some of the events, in particulars, but she said, I'm so saturated. I just don't think I can pay attention to that anymore. And so we're also, I think many people are being forced away from the outer and to the inner.
Well, the problem is it's that journey is not very well known
Mhm.
in our culture. So we have to discuss and get to the methods, by which this can be accomplished. But until the inner makes a shift, meaning the inner inside of you, until it makes a shift, the outer just remains the same. So in this episode, we're really going to, it is our attempt to create a really strong foundation of understanding the background and traditional attempts to improve life on the planet. But as anyone can see, the world has changed. And so has essentially the methodology by which we will move into human development in the future. What I want to talk about in this episode, really, it's a focus on individual growth and development, but the primary issue here is creating foundation upon which we will discuss six spiritual principles in the next episode and six spiritual principles in the third episode.
I think a common barrier, Hayden, that I was referencing before, to this kind of inner work is the fear, the belief that the spiritual or the nonlinear is synonymous with it being impractical or esoteric. And when in fact it's the invisible, it's the nonlinear that's really running our life. And we've all had that experience that things out of the blue come up that we didn't even orchestrate. And that's what sends our life on a whole different trajectory, or our relationships or our career. But my experience has been that it's easier to connect with the nonlinear or the spiritual inside of you because, that's the heart, than it is to really try to understand current events and the outer world, of which we really have no control over. And so much that we don't understand. There are always the invisible workings of the
Well,
individual.
the mind is not capable of seeing the essence of the event or the person and the roles that are being played towards fulfilling the destiny of the process itself, which we really have not gone into very much. But, but that's coming in. I think maybe we'll get to that in the second episode.
But I can be aware of what's happening in my heart. I can be aware of what's happening in the invisible kind of part of me, even the part that I don't share with other people. And if we look at traditionally how we have tried to evolve or transform, the one that most of us are probably most familiar with is religion or the religious approach. And for the most part, this approach focuses on getting ready for the afterlife, like you have 2 choices and, heaven, you're going to hell, so I wanna get ready so that I get the right choice. I don't wanna have to have an eternity of hell, for example. So a lot of our religious approach has been getting ready for the afterlife, a process, where we end up being just a sinner, and the only way that we can be absolved of our sins is by accepting this one particular dogma or belief system.
I think it's absolutely wonderful. You can be a jackass your whole life, and all of a sudden, I'm saved and I'm going to heaven. Of course, that has not played much of a role in spiritualizing mankind, but it has played its part. So that religious approach is really something that most people know a lot about.
Yeah, and I mean, belief systems have been used to kind of blanket the whole of humanity, this one particular belief system, that'll cure all your troubles. And it gets tricky because, of course, I was brought up in a family that values this approach of learning spirituality through, in my case, Christianity. Of course, there are many, many others across the globe. But when we look at it, if social change is the goal of this approach, then that's possible. But the problem is that relies upon the collective to accept those same ideals. If we're going to have change, everybody else has to be on the same page. Escape from all your suffering isn't possible if other people aren't willing to play by the same rules.
Well,
So,
we have no choice. We will force them to play by the same rules, which is oftentimes that violent aspect, even that we see today in Christian nationalism that is playing out, the violence of forcing others to adopt a
well, and
particular
that's very
belief.
different than when I said my upbringing was not that. It had no violence at all in it. But it also is an important part of my life, an important part of growing up, and an important part, I think, us all learning to live together to have this hook into something beyond ourselves, higher than ourselves. It's just that it's incomplete. So it's played a role, but it's kind of incomplete. It's not able to, as you said a minute ago, spiritualize mankind because it's still out there and not in here.
Well, it has a tendency, at least from my perspective, it has a tendency to match the collective consciousness or the consciousness of the collective. So, history has clearly shown that violence is a central tool of many religious movements to achieve their goals. And it's kind of like, well, you're going to be saved whether you like it or not. You may be gay, but don't worry about it. We're going to convert you, because, you have to match the way that we look at things. And as I said, Christian nationalism today purports itself to be a religious movement, but uses the violence of condemning those who are different as a major aspect of its platform. And, without going into analysis of all that, you can see, even in the area of education, how it wants to dictate the goals of education by requiring prayer in schools or the use of the Bible as a literal foundational, really almost the source of history.
Well, I think too, it's differentiating between the teacher of whether you're talking about a Christ or a Buddha. It's the corruption, I think, of the original philosophies and teachings into something that serves the mental. It serves the human being's desire to be right, to have things organized and orchestrated, and to be able to punish people who don't fit in. That's not. I mean, that's not spirituality, of course. That's something when it gets corrupted, when religion itself is used
Well,
as a
it's
tool against certain people.
It's important to understand that whatever the movement is, it sees itself as spiritual. You know, it sees itself as that which comes from, you could say, God, but the worst part of it is the willingness of the kind of traditional religious movements, not, not all of them, but the willingness to inflict the beliefs upon the collective in today's age. The way it does it is through legislative policy and promoting religious
Determining who can
doctrine.
marry who.
Exactly, promoting religious doctrine around marriage and sexual lifestyles, gender roles, reproductive rights, and many other rights of the individual. People assume that because there was no bloodshed, that no violence took place, but that's not true. Violence is the principal tool of an unconscious person to achieve its goal, and you can only magnify that when that tool is part of a movement.
And I think violence can be a look, and I've shared only with you, I think one of the things in my life I'm most ashamed of is a look I gave somebody I didn't intend it, I didn't think it through, but it came from my inside, unconscious self, and I gave someone a look, and that can be a violent act to the person receiving it and to the person giving it, even though, as you said, it's not there's no bloodshed, but it's still damaging the person's psyche, if we say that, or their, feeling of self-worth.
As I've said many times, if you disagree with individuals being gay, homosexual, lesbian, or any other alternative sexual lifestyle, then prove to us that your lifestyle is normal. Produce evidence that your sexual activity is normal and should be modeled by others. And of course, you know what you're going to find if you
I don't
investigated
know.
that.
I don't know if we
There's no
wanna open
such
that
thing.
can of worms, but hey.
Right. There's no such thing. It is unique to the individual, but it is that diversity that creates the unity, and we have not realized that yet.
And then this brings us to the second approach in human development and coming to a greater understanding of how we operate. And that's something that most of us are familiar with. And it's the many different modalities and forms of the traditional therapeutic processes. And it's based almost entirely on the mechanics of the mind. And of course, we have a mind. And so it's helpful to pay attention to how the mind works. But these methods often produce temporary results because they're kind of circular. You know, they try to fix the inner by changing the outer. And I know even in all our work with leadership development, people would be on fire like, yes, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to handle conflict this way. I'm going to think about myself this way so that I don't get activated by all of these taking the bait, because of my negative ground of being, like we talked about in our last podcast. And then a year or two later, they'd say, "Oh, I fell off the wagon. I'm back to taking the bait." So when we're relying solely on the mind to fix it, fixing the inner by changing our outer, it's like we could think of it as we've talked about before, like it's an identity crisis, and we start to treat the dysfunction, the violence, so to speak, as the reference point, the
Well, you
discounting
could
other
just say,
people.
as you said, it may not involve violence. It may just be
Right.
dysfunction of some
And
kind.
I didn't mean physical violence. I just meant even the violence we do to ourselves when we say, "Why are you such a loser? Why are you
Right.
so stupid? Why how could you make that mistake again? Or how could you be, taken in by that or whatever?" But we have a mind, but we're not our minds. You are a spiritual being in a physical body. And while therapy is a really wonderful tool for self awareness, it often identifies the what, but it doesn't get to the why. It tries to fix the dysfunction without asking. This is a really important question. And I think people are going to push back against this a little bit. But why did your soul choose this barrier, this experience that was difficult in the first place? And just like religion, this vital piece of the journey, around self-awareness and also which includes therapy, it just remains incomplete because it doesn't include the spiritual. It doesn't include that invisible dimension.
that spiritual dimension is very specific. It is what I refer to as the transcendent within, or you might think of it as the soul. So, unless the higher part is the reference point for understanding the lower part, you are going to fail. That's just the way it is. You cannot analyze the dysfunction by examining the dysfunction. It is the transcendent that has to be the reference point. Why did I choose this? Why do I draw these things to me? What is it that I'm trying to learn? What is my soul seeking to gain in this lifetime? What is the mission and purpose and destiny of my soul in this lifetime? And until those questions can really be answered, I, I'm going to go with what you said. Therapy has played a very important role in the creation and the movement of self-awareness, but now the game has changed, and humanity, mankind, meaning the individual himself, herself, we are beginning the journey from the mental to the spiritual, because the mental has not been able to create the transformation that we see.
But I think that, we're attracted to that which is a little bit more diagrammable, like the mental, because, it doesn't feel as threatening. I remember Hayden, I posted something on Facebook some years ago, that I would say was more on the spiritual side. It was about unity and all of us being, one. And a dear friend of mine who loves me, and I love this friend, posted underneath or wrote underneath my post, "Wow, you've been in Asheville too long." Like, it was this, like, "Come on, don't be weird. Just stay with the program." I didn't take it as a criticism, but it does, I think people get a little bit like, "Oh, this feels out there," or "This feels scary," and
Well, those stories of people who have had spiritual awakenings and near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, etc. There's there are a there is a plethora of stories of how, as they begin to express that and live that, they were rejected,
Mhm.
even by their friends or their families. So, when you start breaking the mold, I mean, that's just part of it. However, uh, for people who have had those experiences, even a second of spiritual awakening, they're not going back because of uh, I want to say benefits, but it's more than that. The certainty, the absolute knowing of what your life is about. There is no going back at that point, and so that's okay. They're really, in terms of the spiritual approach. So we have the religious approach, we have the traditional therapeutic approach. These have spanned, hundreds of years. And we come to the spiritual approach. They're really kind of two pieces to this. Now, again, what I want to do is create a foundation in this, so we have something to stand on when we start talking about the methods of creating a spiritual life, of gaining a greater level of wisdom. And the old spiritual path, which is one that I grew up in, not religious, being introduced to Buddhism, being introduced to the focus on what is referred to as detachment. Now, I've spoken about that before, but a part of my early development and learning was really based upon this and the fact that the world was an illusion. It was a common term that was used to express this idea, that is still very strong in a lot of spiritual groups today, is Maya, the fact that the world is an illusion. Besides the fact that this is not true, you'll notice that if you believe that, then there's no cure for your suffering except dying and not being here anymore. So then it's logical, if someone adopted the idea that, the world is an illusion, it's logical to ask the question, then what the hell am I doing here if there's no reason for me to be here?
well, the question is also asked, then why bother? Why try to learn? Why
Exactly. And so
why
let the world rot. Let
Mhm.
climate change just destroy the planet, because it doesn't matter. But of course, that's not true. And but within this new part, this second part of spirituality that is being born today, this approach, it is a form of yoga. It is the yoga of knowledge and wisdom of the secret hidden reality inside of each one of us that comes into the physical, emerges, and evolves over time and space.
It's kinda
And
like I know I've shared this analogy, but the acorn that has everything in it, it needs to become an oak tree, but it's not going to become an oak tree if it just sits on the surface. It has to get underneath the dirt, it has to have water, it has to have sunlight penetrating the dirt. For it to grow, it has to actually crack open its shell and sprout out. It
okay, well,
can't just stay.
I'm gonna take what you just said and template today's world in 2026 with that analogy, which is you can know it, but becoming it is an entirely different story. It's an entirely different path and is achieved not through the mind, but through the higher part of you. And this is the difference between the old spiritual models and the new ones. And I mean this really, that's what this is all about. That's what this the corruption, the breakdown, the collapse, the suffering, the intense suffering of millions of people that are going through this today, we are involved in cracking that shell
Mhm.
in order to be able to grow from the mental to the spiritual. We are all involved, whether you like it or not, whether you accept it or not, we are involved in a great transition. And as you know from your experiences, lots of times in love, you know that in order to make that transition, changes have to be made. So, welcome to 2026 because that's what this is all about.
It makes me think of that, gentleman we were listening to the other night, and he was talking about feudalism, and he said, "For 400 years, we've agreed to not go into each other's kingdoms and kill the leaders," because before that, it was just, a
Chaos.
free-for-all, like, anybody would go in and kill anybody and take their wife, take their cow, whatever, take their land, and the leaders, nobility, so to speak, came together and said, "This isn't working. We're just killing each other. We have to stop." And for 400 years, that has been the practice. And now here we are again, changing
We're
that up.
repeating it
And
again.
but it's like you just said, it's cracking open the shell, and the roots that get put down now depends entirely on us as individuals. We can't wait for the collective to do it because the collective is the result of me, is the result of you and everybody listening.
It's the individual writ large. But as the individual becomes more and more conscious of this reality that lies within, a greater truth of one's existence is revealed to that individual. Sri Aurobindo describes it as the integral yoga or the supramental manifestation, which we are simply calling the spiritual approach to reaching the transcendent within, the God within, the divine within. And if those words bother you, then dismiss them and come up with your own. It is the invisible truth that lies inside of you that is not only you, but is also the pathway and the reference point as to how you can go about gaining greater mastery in your everyday life. This method transforms the outer through the inner, but the source upon which the transformation is achieved, as I've said several times already so far, is not through the mind, but through the emergence of this greater truth, the emergence of the soul, of the psychic being over time, a little bit at a time. And it doesn't require a belief system or adhering to a particular doctrine. That's not what this is about.
So if it's not a belief system, then what is it? I mean, how does the mind get a hold of that?
It is a reality. Well, how does the mind get a hold of it? Uh, that's going to take 3 or 4 episodes because there is an approach to it. Now, it's unique to the individual. I was able to gain my particular way of doing it through the third teacher that I worked with, Robert Wilkinson, who introduced me to consciousness. But every individual has their path home because you are not alone. That whatever barriers you face, I promise you that you have been given the pathway to resolve them and to master them. It's why we take birth.
Kinda like an oak tree doesn't become a maple. It becomes an oak tree. But, you answered if it's not a belief, it's a reality. Is that the same thing as it's
It is a reality, but it's not a doctrine. It's
right.
not a dogma.
But is that the same thing as a knowing, like just an internal knowing and
Yes, if we
but
can equate knowing with being,
hmm.
you be the knowledge that you seek, which it's so weird. It's so strange. The knowledge and the wisdom and the fulfillment and the truth that we all seek, the stability that we all seek is the very thing that we are. But we don't know this, and we haven't been taught this in the evolutionary process, at least where mankind has achieved its greatest understanding up to this point. It's only a mental understanding of it has not become a lived experience for the individual and therefore not and neither for the collective.
So it's kind of like if I want the experience of abundance, for example, I could be generous because that's I'm going ahead and being abundant. Is that even possible? You see what I'm saying? I go ahead and be generous because then I get the experience of abundance. Don't wait for abundance to rain down on me like I'm going to win the lottery. This is the time.
Well, there are shortcuts to for everyone involved in the spiritual approach. And one of those is if you want to experience abundance, give up the need to experience abundance.
Mm.
You give up the desire for it, let go, because the mind has already determined in set quantitative and qualitative characteristics what that abundance must look like. And the soul doesn't look at it that
And
way.
someone else would say, "You already have abundance."
Right,
By
exactly. I
their
said, "No, I
standard.
don't." The rich
Okay.
need more. A person who has plenty wants more because of the problems associated with how the mind operates in scarcity.
Mhm.
But what this new spiritual approach establishes is that everyone is of the same essence but of a different form. It establishes that you may be straight and the other person is gay, but both of you are the divine. Both are of God. And that's called unity. That's called harmony. That's called peace, which is what the conscious human being is often seeking.
I think that's where belief systems, we kinda get in pretzels because you'll say, do you believe you're the spark of the divine?" "Absolutely." "And so are they." "Absolutely." "But they're gay." To call it your
Right.
yeah, well, so was that a mistake? Did God make a mistake and they're no, that person is just unconscious or
Well, let's go
corrupted
back
or
to religious approaches. Yeah, but the Bible says, da, 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 and
you
here
dig
we
deep and
go.
you find contradictions there
Right,
too,
and we're
so
stuck once again in the mental. So this emergence of what is taking place in the world, and it is emerging, could be described as an ascent of the individual to reach this higher level of understanding, the higher level of being that will reveal spiritual understanding and realization and truth about one's existence. But then there's the aspect of the descent of truth itself or consciousness itself, or you could say God in physical matter itself. So you have that up down that is constantly going on in our lives. But in bringing down that truth or having the courage to live that truth out in your everyday life, your outer is transformed and you never knew it.
hmm,
How many times, how many stories have we heard of people saying, when I realized the truth, I realized it was always there. I just
mhm.
couldn't see it. So the spiritual approach affirms that the individual is the spark of the divine fire of consciousness that is the fundamental reality and basis of all physical existence. And the union with that consciousness or that truth, that greater understanding, the union of the individual trapped in the ego with the transcendent within that union within one's soul. And maybe we can't even go that far in this conversation, but certainly the seeking of that union with one's soul is the expression of that truth and realization.
And if I'm in touch with my soul, not my mental and physical self, as you know, of course, I'm going to be in touch with that too. But if I'm in touch with my soul, I will not commit a violence, a psychic harm, a barrier between me and another person. That just wouldn't happen. That's the ego at work. The soul would definitely function from unity. Um, for example, when I realized I'd hurt this other person, this was 30 years ago. I apologized and I embraced the person and I said, "I'm so sorry." And I'm the one that has carried the wound of that, I think, much more than the other person. Because once we get in touch with that part of ourselves, we see that there is no division between us, that what happens to you does happen to me.
Well, when you begin to see the purpose of the transgression or the mistake, when you begin to see the purpose of it, then you also see there is no need to carry the wound any longer,
Mhm.
to carry the shame any longer, because you understand that it was about your growth and evolution and transformation, and that probably, as it does with most people, create a great deal of humility in your life. Because you're starting to really understand that greater truth about who you are. So it's this foundation, this understanding of the spiritual approach, not the old path, but this new path that is emerging today. It is not about trying to transform the mind. The mind is what it is.
And I'm thankful my
And
mind
so,
usually works.
well,
Yeah.
let me go back to something you said just a second ago. It's not that the ego would not get activated and want to inflict violence on someone
Okay.
who I have experienced. Wait a minute, I want to say that differently. Not I have experienced. I have often experienced violent thoughts in these days
Yeah.
and times of how to address this ignorance and stupidity that has taken over the world. But as much as my ego might want to do something
Right.
like that, of course,
Uh,
I would never do it. But let's keep the conversation real because it's not gonna be the absence of the
right.
old you. It will be the transformation of the you that you are witness to in spite of the old you
But I'll
that's
be aware I'm aware that wanting to throat punch somebody is
right. And the other day you were asking me,
you
you
shouldn't
know,
tell this.
I thought that was hilarious. Well, if I did throat punch somebody, what's the best way to do it? Do I use a fist? And I said, no. I said, your
Karate.
fist is too big. You have to karate chop it. You know?
I'd be so unsuccessful at that. I
Well,
can't even high five
right,
for
I
some
know.
reason.
You probably get your hand bitten off, but see,
But it
it's
is
okay
getting
to
activated by the things that
and
my
it's
mind
okay to
says
acknowledge
are
that
not right.
and not use that against yourself. But without this wisdom and knowledge that is contained within this aspect of the new spiritual movement that is already afoot, look what we're stuck with. We sit around and why does something still feel missing? Why is life meant to be a constant cycle of struggling and
Why do we
pain?
have to have destruction to get to creation?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, how do I learn anything different than what I have learned about the purpose of my life? How is it possible that peace can exist when there is so much ignorance? And who am I? And what am I doing here? What is my role in this? And where do I find the answers? So, in kind of wrapping up some thoughts about this foundation as we get ready to move forward and continue to examine the goals and the aims and the methods of this new way of functioning and being. It's 2026, and we are learning that the answers aren't out there, but the answers are inside of you. And that's what this work is all about, is about this transformation that is waiting on you.
And that's why building a foundation is so important for us individually. We've been and as a humanity, we've been traveling this path of evolution of life for billions of years. We're moving from the physical to the emotional to the mental, and finally, we get to that fourth quadrant of the spiritual. We're not in the feudal times anymore.
The size of the foundation is 100% mathematically proportional to the height that
Mhm.
it can bear. So the foundation has to be there. And even if in the beginning all it is mental, hey, I'm in favor of that for the individual. Just introducing your mind to new concepts, new ideas about what is really going on. This is tremendous. Without the foundation, it will fail.
I remember when I was in high school and in history class, and they talked about civilizations would, usually last about 250 years. And I wasn't the best math student, but I did do some quick calculations and realized, hey, the United States is going to hit that mark during my lifetime. And it was something I wasn't looking forward to or that I hoped wouldn't happen. And I kept thinking maybe history's not going to repeat itself. But now I realize it's what an incredible time, Hayden, to be here. What an incredible time to be on the planet. It's not ordinary times. I mean, we're learning that history doesn't have to repeat itself,
And
although it looks like it is.
what a disastrous time to be
Yeah.
on the planet.
But we're
But
not the prisoners of our past, really. We get to create. What does the creative time period look like, as we are kind of pioneering the future, not only for ourselves, but for our children, our grandchildren, for all of mankind. And the very grandest part of you, of me, it's not shaken by the events of today, as difficult as they are to witness and to bear. So we're here to help transform the world, like not just survive it. Like I was hopeful as a younger person that maybe nothing would go bad, during my lifetime. Maybe nothing would go off the rails, but that my role as an individual, your role as a human being on the planet at this time is the very most important piece of that puzzle.
and because it is the invisible that is creating the visible, it's the metaphysical that is creating the physical. That's why this issue of consciousness becomes so important, because until there is a shift in our consciousness, we're going to keep repeating all this. So stop trying to be spiritual. You already are. And you can
Hey, one
deny
less
it
thing.
and you can disagree with it. You can ignore it, but you can't change it, because that is the evolutionary process at work through the lens of the individual. So it truly is. It's only a matter of time, and that's time with a capital T.
And doing this work alone and not really having access to some of these principles that we're talking about and that we've learned is incredibly difficult. And that's why we're so excited to be teaching this consciousness and the becoming process at the Omega Institute. We're going to be up there July 31st through August 2nd. And we would love to meet you there in person. We'd love to have you come explore these topics with us and find your answers to some of the questions that we've posed today.
We also want you to know about the becomingyoujourney.com private curriculum
And
uh,
community.
and community that is about spiritual principle and how to apply them to your life in creating a bridge from the insanity of the world that we are all witness to today to the stability that lies within you.
So if you've been asking, who am I and what am I doing here? And I think everybody asks that at some point, maybe even daily lately. Come join us at Omega and we can work on these answers together. You can find all the details and register at truthspringasheville.com. You can also find out more about Becoming You Journey. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
You'd be happy to incorporate those in the episodes. Speaking of which, as I said, in the next episode, we're going to cover 6 of 12 really crucial spiritual principles that can help you increase tremendously your understanding of your life and work. Because if we can't learn to apply this greater truth, then nothing is going to change. So we'll see you next time.
And thank you so much for joining us today.